I've wrapped up most of the editing on my first solo feature documentary, and I learned so much from that process. Making a project of that length is a difficult task, and I spent countless hours interviewing, shooting, and editing. But there was one unforeseen lesson that I needed to learn on this project, and that was becoming too attached to my version of the story. Hopefully you can learn from my experience and take this lesson with you into your next project, because I think it will make your films more authentic and powerful for your audience. The biggest lesson that I learned was to not become too attached to the story I had in my mind. This can apply to narrative films as well, but especially in documentaries when the story is unfolding right in front of you. It is so easy as filmmakers to assume what will happen or what something means, especially when you're the one editing the story together. Either you don't want to undo a bunch of hard work, or you really want something to turn out a certain way. But I just want to remind you that these are people's lives that you're documenting. You have to realize that you are not in control and just follow the story. I don't want to spoil too much of my documentary, but in No One Sleeps Outside, I was capturing Eden Village. They create tiny home villages for the chronically homeless, and it is just such an amazing ministry that I really believe in. It was an honor to get to interview the residents and hear their stories. And there was one individual whose story was just perfect. I had the story structure put together perfectly in editing, and his journey was one of my favorite parts of the film. However, something happened in the time that I was working on the project that completely changed the trajectory of his life, and therefore his story. I didn't know what to do. I was trying to figure out if I should still include his story the way I had it in my mind, or if I should just cut him out of the film entirely. So I wrestled with that for a while. Throughout the time that I spent working on the documentary, I got pretty close with some of the staff at Eden Village. Because I engaged with them and listened, they were comfortable telling me to show what happened to the resident. They felt like it was a realistic example of something that they deal with in their line of work, helping the homeless, and they wanted it to be shown instead of glossed over. My first reaction was kind of iffy because I'd already made up my mind that this was how his story went. I had just gotten too attached to what I wanted the story to be. But after thinking about it more, I realized they were right, and so we added in another scene to kind of explain the situation better. And that whole sequence is my favorite part of the film. It is so emotional and raw, and that's because it's reality. There was a lot of pain and sadness expressed, and its place in the editing timeline is really a stepping stone towards this ultimate idea of hope that the film ends on. The same concept applies to receiving criticism from the audience. Sometimes people will bring something up that you should add in to make it easier to understand, or they don't like a certain shot or part of the film, and you have to learn what is and isn't worth reacting to. But I would make sure to analyze what they're saying because they may be onto something. Especially since they are viewing your project for the first time, maybe without knowing anything about the subject. Whereas you may have seen the film millions of times and got to know the subjects very well. So I would especially look for anything that is repeated multiple times by different people. We did some private showings in No One Sleeps Outside, and we handed out feedback cards to get responses from people on things that may need to be improved. There were little things here and there that we noted, but the biggest things were when multiple people all mentioned the same thing. This is how we knew to look into something. For example, at the beginning of the film, the audience is thrown into an interview scene with the Eden Village staff and a homeless woman applying to live at the village. Originally, I didn't have a name title for the applicant because I liked the idea of the audience trying to figure out what is going on. However, a lot of the feedback said they were confused at the beginning, but that it made sense later. Which may be what you're going for, but you also don't want your audience disengaging because they're confused. It's all about balancing the speed at which you reveal information. If you explain everything too quickly, the audience will have no reason to watch the rest of the film. But if you take too long to provide information, they may disengage. So we learned from feedback that it was a little bit too confusing at the beginning, so we adjusted. So being flexible is really important and will lead to better films. Now, I'll add somewhat of a rebuttal to everything I just said in that don't let your fear of interfering lead to becoming too passive of a filmmaker. If you're just reacting to what is happening, sometimes you'll miss it or misinterpret what is going on because you're too out of the loop. So I would recommend speaking with your subjects before even setting up your camera and understanding the trajectory their story is on right now, but also throughout the production, just check in with them, see how they're doing both for your film, but also as friends, which I think when you work on a project with someone for so long, you start to know more and more about someone, and they will also feel more comfortable around you. So even though I just said to be careful that you aren't interfering with your subjects' lives, just don't go too far to the opposite side of that where you're too much of a fly on the wall out of fear that you'll mess something up. Just get to know your subjects and make them comfortable, and then if something happens down the line, you can both course correct together. I hope this was helpful and maybe helped you to take a step back and see if you're overreaching too much on any of your projects. If you take anything away from this video, is that you are documenting people's lives, not creating them. While they are characters in your films, and it can be helpful to see them like that sometimes, ultimately they are real people with real feelings and emotions. So follow that realness and you'll make better films. I'll see you guys next week.